1965. It was a time of revolutionary change. Music, dress styles, the fight for civil rights, the Vietnam War, a counterculture, social change. It was a pivotal time in the history of the United States as President Lyndon Johnson implemented many of the social reforms of President John Kennedy as he proposed to help eliminate poverty and racial injustice.
It was a time in our history where we really recognized that communities that were living on the margin needed to be brought into the mainstream of America, and that included elder Americans. And of course, the act built on, the first time we ever did anything for seniors in this country was Social Security in the 1930s during the Great Depression.
We as a society started to ask the question, what is our role vis-a-vis older adults in our community? And so the beginnings of these programs really emerged after, I think, awareness came about through Social Security and Medicare that there's a frail population out there, a population who's living independently but needs some support. And those supports could be provided either by family members, neighbors, or perhaps some kind of social service providers in the community. So I think there was a growing awareness, along with the growing longevity of the population and then the general growth of the population.
The life of seniors have changed dramatically since the 1960s. I was 10, my grandparents were older, well, they were my grandparents. The lives they experience and the lives that older Americans experience today is very, very different. And it's been for the better, whether it's been in how folks live, where they live, the type of activities they're able to be involved in. It has truly brought people who tended to be marginalized as they aged into the mainstream and the life of America, and certainly into the life of Seattle.
The Older Americans Act was passed at a time very different from today. It was different from today in several ways. First of all, there were more economic resources. It was a great society time period. There was tremendous social consciousness about the needs of vulnerable populations. There was just a sense, the great society of things that could be done to try to solve problems. And in terms of the historical perspective, it's often referred to as a time period of compassionate ageism. Older adults were seen as deserving. Of course, there had been the Social Security Act in 1935 as the first major piece of legislation. Then there was the first White House Conference on Aging in 1961, and the formation of the Senate's Committee on Aging, Select Committee on Aging, that was in 61, and then the Older Americans Act in 65. In some ways, it was overshadowed by the passage of Medicare and Medicaid, also in 1965, which of course were much more significant pieces of legislation. But it was a recognition that there was a need for services to promote older adults' well-being. It was not well-funded at the beginning. It still isn't well-funded. But, and the focus at that point was on state units of aging, not the local area agencies. But again, it was a context in which people thought the resources were there to address problems, and older adults were seen as a population that needed extra attention and supports. Again, people weren't living as long as they are today, so at the time the Older Americans Act was passed, I don't think there was really any sense of what life expectancy would be like now.
This was way back in the beginning, just when the nutrition sites were set up. The Older Americans Act had just gotten off the ground, and so the nutrition sites were in churches, and so people like me were sent out to try to get people from the community to participate in these nutrition sites. And then it began to grow, after all of the, I think in those days there were 10 or 11 nutrition sites, I could be wrong. And they, as I say, were in churches, and it was a part-time job, it wasn't a full-time at that point. And when they found me an office, one time I had an office in a senior center, another time I had an office in a church. And then as people started coming and people started really creating community in those nutrition sites, their needs became more obvious. So it was obvious, well, we need to know more about how to meet people's financial needs, how to meet their emotional needs. What are they going to do when they can't get here? So it began to grow, and that's, that was the beginnings of the training and the whole administration looking at, well, where is this going to go?
Then in 1969, a 34-year-old Wes Ullman was elected mayor of Seattle, the youngest mayor ever elected by the city. From Election Day on, Mayor Ullman faced racial tensions, anti-war demonstrations, a police scandal, the Boeing bus of 1970, and he overhauled the bureaucracy and encouraged citizen participation.
Well, when I first was elected, one of the first calls I got after I was elected mayor was from the CEO of the Boeing company, who told me that the Boeing company was in deep trouble and that they were going to be laying off a massive number of people. The Great Boeing Recession, we called it then. About 60-some thousand people were laid off nationally by the Boeing company. So we didn't have any money. And we were laying off cops and firemen and the rest. So people said we shouldn't be able to do anything for the elderly. Well, we had to, because as we looked down the road, as I say, we had just a few, just less than 10% people in the city were older, over 65. I could see the boomers coming. They were down the road. And we had to start paying attention to start doing something about it. But we didn't have very much money to do it with. So we undertook a whole number of initiatives. We formed the division. We formed the mayor's office on aging.
Which was kind of the public face of aging services. Political, yes, but also well-intended.
We formed a whole host of other programs, the SPICE program, where we got the older people to come into the schools for lunch and then tried to get them together so that both the young and the old benefited from that kind of relationship. But it was important for us to realize that here are those folks who had medical issues, particularly housing issues, that we needed to start to recognize and we needed to start to deal with.
Services were fragmented all over the place in terms of the various discount programs and so forth, so we wanted to create a one-stop shopping concept. Chicago had a mayor's office for senior citizens, and Ken Cameron, who really ran so much of the division at that time, thought we ought to name this the mayor's office for senior citizens, this new service place. And Wes Ullman, who was the mayor at that time, was very, very focused on older adults. He used to say, my number one priority is senior citizens. So it made a lot of sense for him in terms of what he was trying to do, and it made a lot of sense for us in terms of creating a single point that people could come, get various discount cards, the Metro cards and so forth, to have one place to go rather than try to figure it out on their own.
I was not the first director. I believe I was the second director. By that time, the office was administering discounts on utilities for low-income seniors, water, sewer, garbage, city light. So when I came in, I created a whole bunch of public programs to involve the community and help where it was needed. It was fun. I loved it. I had a wonderful staff, and we had Mark Stensager was my immediate boss initially, and he was a wonderful boss and just gave me free rein. Division on Aging, they got the money from the federal government. They did the planning, the process stuff. We did the community outreach. I think, from my recollection, to feel valued. And I think that's still true. And so highlighting them, highlighting their achievements, giving them ways to use their skills and abilities, I think was important.
Aging services are by no means limited to Seattle. In 1978, then County Executive John Spellman established a county office on aging to serve the fast-growing senior population in suburban and unincorporated King County. Suburban cities have stepped up too. Wonderful senior activity centers operate in Kirkland, North Bellevue, Des Moines, Kent, Auburn, Renton, Federal Way, and many other areas around the county. Meanwhile, in Seattle, a young mayor was just getting going.
it was very important that we get some enthusiasm going and some programs going. And so I brought in a number of younger people, and they took to it like a duck to water. They realized that this was an area that really needed some involvement by particularly younger people and the enthusiasm. And then we got a lot of the older people back involved, or involved for the first time, many of them. And they became really enthusiastic people who were going to help us get this thing going.
Denise Klein, who was our director back then, was kind of a very creative and a very strategic thinker. And so we found ourselves, I think, on the forefront of a lot of conversations, both in local government and in the community.
And they developed an interlocal agreement with two other partners, King County and United Way. And so there was a three-way policy partnership that was set up shortly before I got there.
Our model, which we have three sponsors, United Way of King County, the City of Seattle, and King County government, is very unique. I think we're the only agency like that in the country.
But in 1973, money was added to it, and the City of Seattle was designated to be the agency that received the money. Then the year I was hired, and the reason I was hired, the Senior Citizen Services Act was passed. And that added a bunch of state money into purchase services for older people. So I came in and wrote the first healthcare contracts using those state funds.
And so we had lots of conversations with our partners trying to figure out what their role was, what our role was, how we could really serve the entire county, which was growing and then predicted to grow kind of exponentially as the boomers began to retire. So the vibe was really, let's get our cards together, let's get our act together, because we know that second act coming along is going to bring a real explosion of interest and need.
With the services and fundings established, there was an effort to find new ways in which to help seniors.
The base programs, as they started out, are pretty kind of obvious. You need an information network. You need to be able to, one call tells all. How do you get information to people about these opportunities, most of them new? And the nutrition, whether Meals on Wheels or in kind of a group setting, those were two very basic programs that we started out with, and then tried to work with the community to develop senior centers or senior activity places where they could be delivered. Beyond that, then, as the network started to look around, the issues around the older adult who really needed extra help, not just the meal or the phone call, but a little extra help to stay at home. Maybe it's a little chore, somebody to check in. That kind of service started to be talked about because we were seeing more older adults sort of heading towards nursing homes because that seemed to be the only option. And so a very exciting time happened in this state in the late 80s and early 90s to develop more in-home options. And these options primarily were funded by the Medicaid program. And Washington State's one of the top states in this country who has a very robust Medicaid-funded program of in-home services for older adults.
I think the people at the state saw that, the population was aging, and with aging came complex medical issues, and then that would have a huge impact on nursing home costs. And that was not necessarily the way that the state of Washington wanted to go.
Some things were happening very positively. You had a lot of housing development in Seattle. A lot of resources were coming into play, but still, having enough available, particularly for the low income, and getting information out to people to let people know what was available was very important. I also think then, as it is now, staying in your home as long as you possibly can with the right kind of support resources was a major issue then, and certainly a major issue today.
But they reduced nursing home beds to focus on community-based care, and all of a sudden that changed everything. For us, the focus changed from just giving information about Social Security or where to go for a meal program to clients that were, how I would describe it, as 2 steps away from a nursing home. Multiple health care needs, hypertension, heart issues, stroke victims, inappropriate or inadequate transportation, no primary care doc, multiple issues that were going to land them in a hospital and then a nursing home for the rest of their lives at a high cost to the state. So the state made that decision to target complex, multiple need seniors, and that was our job. So I would say it was this, it was the demographics that changed.
Senior Services today is the largest nonprofit agency in the area that's serving the needs of seniors and those who care for them. The program we're probably most known for is our Meals on Wheels program, but that is just one of a breadth of services that we have that help support elders. So we have a group of senior centers. We have 7 senior centers that we run that are in communities. We have our minor home repair. We have Hyde Shuttle, volunteer transportation, enhanced fitness, the caregiver support, and our information and assistance program. And the way we help to shape the network as it is today, our information and assistance program was started in the late 1960s. And before that, it was the way that seniors got into some of the services that they needed was they had to move out of their homes and go into nursing homes. So information and assistance really made it possible for people to get the services in the community that would allow them to stay in their homes and age in place.
It's not with aging sending people for a place to die. It's a place to live. And the more that environment is such that you can express yourself and still live, the longer you'll live. And I think that's what you're really looking at. And having people who understand that nuance is really important.
We're providing services for seniors, but they were for the more highly functional seniors. When we were all scattered all over the county, it was just people that could come into the centers. They were all, the staff were in the senior centers, and clients came to the center. Where we came in-house in the City of Seattle Human Services Department, we brought all the case managers in-house, and then the focus began to focus on the frail elders. And so we went to their homes rather than having the clients come to us. And that was the interesting part, because these were people that really didn't call and ask for anything. Somebody had to refer them. And so staff were more engaged over time with a person, trying to make sure that they were safe and they were able to stay in their homes as long as possible.
I think it's important because I think that people don't give up when they're in their own home. Their neighbors pop in to see them. They've got everything around them reminding them of their life before they became fragile. Place is very emotional, I think, for people. I think, even younger people get an attachment to place. So my job was really to connect them to the services that would keep them there in the home. It's actually less expensive.
As the agency's ability to connect people to services increased and improved, the focus started to shift to try and reach people that were not being served by the programs currently, an effort to make the program be more culturally competent.
There was a large influx starting to happen as far as what that aging population looked like in King County. In the 80s, it was a large presence of Southeast Asian seniors. And then in the 90s, you saw a huge influx of Russian Ukraine. And then in the 2000s, you're talking about East African populations, Somali, Ethiopians, others. And King County, being probably the most diverse county in the nation, from what I heard, had to come up with a service delivery model to meet that need. So that's where the factors all kind of came into play there.
Well, we made a distinct effort to try to meet the needs of people of color, and we have a large Asian population here. So we stepped up and made a real effort. For example, one of the senior citizen high-rise facilities, housing facilities, is in the heart of the central area. And another one is in the heart of what was then called Chinatown, now it's International District. These were set up to try to deal with those individual and very important parts of our city society.
the initial involvement was through the Mayor's Council for African American Elders. So I came there to advocate on behalf of certain programs focused on that community's needs, specifically the African American Elders Project that was at that time had not found a home. It was a pilot project and it demonstrated its efficacy and benefit to the community. And so I wanted to make sure that program continued to grow and had a solid funding basis, and found a home in an organization that could promote it, and that was Catholic Community Services. So that was my initial advocacy engagement with ADS.
Well, when I first got involved, I was the executive director of the Asian Counseling and Referral Service and had started in that capacity in the early 70s. I don't think we really connected directly with the Area Agency on Aging until the latter 70s. And at that point, we collaborated on a major federal grant to expand meal services to the Asian and Pacific Islander community. At that time, it was a real fight to get the establishment to recognize the needs of different minority groups, and in particular, the one I was working with were the Asian and Pacific Islanders, people from Samoa, people from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, the Philippines, Korea, Japan, China, and so forth. We're really not accessing the services that they were entitled to. So through this collaborative grant with the Area Agency, ACRS and the Area Agency put together, I think, a very creative program to reach out and provide services that were ethnically specific, culturally specific to those different groups.
So we, well, with case management, which is our largest program, we serve about 10,000 people a month. And so we hire staff who speak the languages and are from the cultures that represent our clients. And probably about half of our clients speak languages other than English. And so, again, the challenge there is to be able to hire the staff, to train the staff, and then and with so many diverse cultures is finding enough staff to represent all the cultures. So we've been somewhat successful in hiring staff from different cultures and who can speak different languages, but the immigrant and refugee population is still growing. There's new emerging populations, so then there's a new challenge and a new language that we're not familiar with, or a new culture we're not familiar with. So it's another learning curve to then, kind of figure out how to provide services appropriately to that culture.
A lot of African American clients were not getting services that they too were eligible for and that they were deserving of. And so there was a movement within the division that to look at those populations based on the allocations of funds and so forth. And I'm really proud to say that with the people that I worked with, Karen Winston is one particular person. She and I worked very closely together, looking at the needs of these people that were not being met. And it started kind of a movement within the division, where we actually went to our boss and talked about, we had to come up with a plan about these individuals. They too need to have some services. All the other programs, all of the services around the county, which other populations, other people of color, were their populations where their leaders were actually coming to the city asking for funds for their particular groups. And there were not many folks asking for African Americans. And so Karen and another colleague in our department, they actually were had been assigned to look into having a forum looking at the needs of people of color. And they saw, I was one of those individuals who came to that forum, that in fact at that forum only about 3 or 4 African American leaders showed up. And we really saw that there was a lack of focus on the African American community, along with the African American leadership itself didn't realize that they needed to focus on these frail people. So it started a whole new continuum of care where we started looking at the folks. And then we came up with a plan, as I said before, and took it to our director, and then it actually ended up at the mayor's office. The department really supported the efforts that we were trying to make. And as I recall that first year, we were told that, oh, you're gonna serve about 50 people. And that you can't serve people that's got to be unduplicated. So we understood that if they were already receiving services from other providers, we were not to serve those clients. However, that was in July, I think July, and by the end of the year, we had close to 200 people that we had found that were in the community, in the Central District and some in the Southeast District, that had not been receiving services from anybody. Frail, older African Americans who had been here for many years. And they were in dire need of some real comprehensive kinds of services, so they too could stay in their homes. And so that began the whole process of working and calling this program the African American Elders Project at that time. It wasn't a program then. And so we were able to demonstrate against all odds that there was a need for this population.
For me, that growth happened as with the support of the ADS Advisory Council, because the council, I think, recognized, in fact, I'm sure it did, it was articulate about the need for expanding access as the diversity of seniors in King County broadened. And so it was a timely engagement in that people were conscious of the need to be more inclusive of various populations.
It's kind of going through this sort of process where you have in the beginning your kind of lighter touch social programs, then we got into the in-home visiting and the Medicaid and the case management. That brought real strength to our clients, but it also brought strength to our agency. When we saw ourselves as the provider of those services, we understood our role in sort of that small H health. We had more nurses involved in our staff. We got involved nationally and at a statewide level because there were policies and programs to develop. And so it boosted us into another level of functioning and created kind of a platform for us then to launch into more of the family caregiver and some of the more recent programs. So there's an evolution that goes on. And if you look at states that don't have a program like ours, the area agency that's involved in the long-term care world, those agencies are very small and almost more like a senior center with a few programs, whereas our agency has always been very much involved in policy, public policy, and broader, countywide and statewide efforts to try to build the system for older adults so that it works for them in their late life.
I think we serve about 40,000 people a year, so that's an unduplicated number. So that in case management, you're serving the same people every month, so there's a lot of duplication in your count there. But we have, between home delivered meals and the meals that are provided in the senior centers and case management and health promotion type of activities, so we serve about 40,000 people a year. So it requires we have a very large provider network. We contract with many agencies.
The needs constantly change. The needs of one day or 1 year are quite different. The needs of one set of senior citizens are quite different from those of 10 years later. So it's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and constantly trying to step up and take care of the newer needs.
I think that what's really interesting as the generations age is how their needs change too. I think that there will be a lot more emphasis with regard to boomers on wellness, exercise, healthy aging, rather than waiting for someone to become frail or to become dependent. We want to be sure that people as they age engage in exercise and healthy wellness programs to ensure that they can live a very long and productive and happy lives.
I think what's happened is, instead of putting seniors on a shelf or in a corner, we realize, and partly this has to do with improving health and improving diets over the generations, that seniors can be very active. They can be elected officials. They can continue to work longer. They can be major contributors to their community once they choose to retire. We have the former Secretary of State, who is at the higher end of the baby boomer generation, looking to run for president of the United States. That's how our world is changing. So I think we are starting to redefine what it means to be old and what it means to be a senior.
At some point in the future, we're going to be about a quarter of the population, but I don't know whether there's going to be the political will to come up with the money to make it possible to do things like that. I don't see us at this point as being the most important demographic out there. I think people are concerned about children and education. And I don't want to pit one group against another, but I think that for the most part, politicians, although they've been given the information, have trouble understanding it or planning for it. They're not planning. I think it's going to hit, and they're not going to know what to do with this huge group of older people.
So the array of services continue to grow and shift as the needs of the aging populations change. The great thing is the system is flexible to meet the needs of each new generation.
When the Older Americans Act was passed, it's pretty clear if you study it that what was more important than the provision of services was the creation of a system that would support people as they aged, that would have a service component but would have other kinds of things. And what happened is we got kind of focused on the services and not so much on the other things. And now we're kind of returning to some of the other things which have mostly to do with community development. If we're not going to have enough money from the public sector to support all of those boomers in the way that we've been able to support the pre-boomer generation, we ourselves are going to have to do more. You and I, our neighborhoods are going to have to be more friendly to people physically, and ADS is in the forefront of looking at how to have livable cities and elder-friendly communities so that you don't just have to think about services and how to provide them.
We have a lot of change in communities, so they're figuring out how do we have different kinds of food, how do we have different kinds of activities that are going to draw in the wonderfully diverse communities that we have here in Seattle. Again, some of the communities now have those baby boomers that are starting to kind of walk past the senior center and look in, is that a place for me? So we have to make sure that we have things that not just the 70, 80, 90-year-olds are going to want to do in a senior center, but what is going to bring in that 55, 60-year-old person? So we have to think about those kinds of activities. Some of the fun things that we do in a couple of our senior centers, we've really engaged the LGBT population really well. We have Rainbow Bingo, which is one of the hottest fundraisers and just fun events that some of those do. So reaching out into those different communities that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a senior center.
In 2005, we were doing our $3 million capital campaign to expand this area, our facility, and we noticed that there was really nothing that we were doing that was capturing the gay community in West Seattle. We have a very large community of gay in West Seattle, the LGBT community. So we just had to put a committee together, and we just decided that we would start a Rainbow Bingo. That was in 2005. For the last year, we've been sold out every one of our games, and we do 8 a year. So that helps keep the lights on, that helps keep the services, it helps keep our social worker out there in the homes and doing outreach in the community. So makes me happy. And she always asks who is new to the show, and about at least half raise their hands that they're new to the program. So it's word of mouth, and it keeps growing. We've had to cut it off the last 4 or 5 times.
We've heard the history of where senior services started. We've seen some of the current offerings in King County, but where does the future lie for senior services?
We are learning every day, and we know how to keep people home and safe. We know how to pay their providers and figure out the right set of services. We know how to work with their families to get them supported as best they can. But I think what we're looking to is how do we work with the older adult, him or herself, to be as active as possible and kind of forestall some of the later life health issues. And so a very exciting area is the area of health promotion for older adults. And our agency, along with others, have been in the forefront, both locally and nationally, in designing some new programs for that. You used to think 40 was old, and well, then 60 was old. And now, 80 is the new 60. People can build muscle mass, people can regain balance, people can live and be fit into late life. You don't need to be a weightlifter, but you certainly can be physically active in safe ways. And it's great for your mental health, it's great for your physical health. And we're learning now that this is an area that you can do no wrong. You just need to open the doors and design programs that will engage people in taking ownership of their own health in real positive ways.
Healthy lifestyle, adequate finances, and social supports. And social supports are critical. In some ways, that's probably the most important component for well-being in old age, is having social supports.
Diet, food, the exercise, a lot of those things now in programs, people are learning what they need to do more so than what they had before.
And I don't think that people should be forgotten as they become older. They are fully members of our community, and we need to ensure that they can fully participate in our community. So everyone should be respected and assisted if there is assistance needed, regardless of the age, whether they're children, teenagers, or senior citizens. And sometimes I do feel that seniors are perhaps ignored or less thought of in our community because they can become a little bit more isolated, and I want to ensure that that does not happen.
Everyone is entitled to a homemaker service or a chore service or to utilize transportation, but we have to make sure we're getting it to the populations that need it the most.
This is my 73rd year, and I'm still pushing. And as long as I have breath, I'll be pushing for older people to make sure that we don't forget about them. They didn't forget about us way back. They took care of us, took care of the community. And so that's a right that the community take care of them. The community, meaning political systems, all take care of their elders, whoever they are, that they get taken care of until they can't take care of themselves anymore. But don't leave them hanging. I think that's cruel.
I think what it is that you've got to make people feel that they can have fun in their older age and that they don't have to just kind of sit there. You can stimulate, you can use our elders in ways that we probably never thought before, but now you can. So these are assets in our community, and we have to think of elders as assets and not as a burden.
I'm very proud to live in a city that's starting in the 70s, stepped up and started offering these services and developing the programs for seniors. And that has only grown over time. And you know, over many mayors and many council members, we should be proud of the leadership we have. We have a challenge though, in that the aging population is growing exponentially. And we have to offer that same level of leadership for the services that the city has offered through its office on seniors and aging. We have to offer that next level of leadership to be sure that we can meet the need that's about to hit us.